When you first read The Colored Museum, you might wonder how one would display Black lives through actors in a museum. Of all places, how? How do you condense such an abstract thought on display like you would an art piece? The confusing way that playwright George C. Wolfe calls his various scenes within the play as exhibits, you may have not noticed at a first read or a second, but you have already been given the key on how George C. Wolfe is forcing its audience to view his script. So in order to understand why this play on Black lives are set in a museum, we must define what an exhibit is. The word exhibit is defined as 1. Publicly display a work of art of items of interest in an art gallery or museum or at a trade fair. 2. Manifest or deliberately display a quality or type of behavior. 3. An object or collection of objects on public display in an art gallery or museum or at a trade fair. The play utilizes a museum as a framing device for the readers to deliberately display a collection of objects on display, the objects being the experiences of the Africans, specifically African Americans. Going into the 1991 televised PBS version of The Colored Museum on a program they call The Great Performances, directed by Andrew Carl Wilke and George C. Wolfe, notice in the introduction of the first exhibit, we are shown an establishing shot of the nameless art patrons. You might have not noticed it at first, but this short intro is the perspective we are given. We, like the patrons, are spectating and observing the exhibits for the rest of the play. As we make our way through the patrons, we hear a mix of jazz, hip-hop, and classical music until we reach the percussionist with the African drums.
You took the part that once was my heart. I'm all of a baby. I'm gonna be good.
What's interesting to note is that jazz is known as the American classical music, which is also hailed as the mother of hip-hop, and the mixing of the three genres leading up to the sounds of the African drums is almost like we are being led back in time, which echoes the themes of the first exhibit. We are introduced to a flight attendant of the American slave ship who goes by the name of Miss Pat.
Welcome aboard Celebrity Slave Ship, departing the Gold Coast and making short stops in Bahia, Port-au-Prince, and Havana before our final destination of Savannah. Hi, I'm Miss Pat, and I'll be serving you here in Cabin A.
As she explains the itinerary of the flight's departure from the Gold Coast, a former British colony in West Africa known today as the Republic of Ghana, we are told that the passengers will be stopping in Salvador da Bahia in Brazil, Port-au-Prince in the Republic of Haiti, Havana in Cuba, and lastly, Savannah, Georgia in the US. Probably, you'll realize that this exhibit is referencing the Atlantic slave trade. And now, you might be asking, why through a framing reference as absurd as a flight attendant? Yeah, it's pretty fucking dark. Well, when we normally view flight attendants, they usually are a symbol for the passenger safety. Usually. Often knowing the ins and out of the safety protocols, they are the best in explaining what to do in any case of emergency.
Some of you are still concerned about getting there safely. Enjoy your flight.
George C. Wolfe is subverting these ideas. Pay attention to the curtains behind the flight attendants. Who are the pilots of the plane? If the passenger and the flight attendants are black, why is the person explaining the safety protocols black? Well, that's because she is important to the design of the ship, as she will trivialize and rationalize the bad experiences and normalize the horrific conditions of the black passengers as if they aren't an emergency. This may be because a familiar voice and face may soften terrible conditions. However, the horrifying aspect of Miss Pat is that although she may be higher in status, she is still subjected to the same journey as the passenger. And pay attention to the request against certain actions on board the plane.
We also ask that you please refrain from call and response singing between cabins, as that sort of thing can lead to rebellion. And of course, no drums are allowed on board. Thanks for flying, celebrity. And here's hoping we have a pleasant takeoff.
However, the passengers in coach plays the drums.
I'm sorry to disturb you, but someone is playing drums. Now, what did we just say about drums? No drums. It must be someone in coach. But we here in cabin A are going to ignore those drums. In fact, we don't hear those drums at all. No, we don't. Repeat after me. I don't hear any drums.
I don't hear any drums.
And I will not rebel. Okay.
This may be a reference to the complicated classist attitudes that Black Americans have seen, and most may known as the field and house slave dichotomy.
And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" He was as sick as the master. When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes. They ate the worst food. And they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes.
Coach on a plane is a reference to the economic flying class, and cabin A may be seen as somewhat more of a luxurious cabin on board. This might be why Miss Pat is seen in a more comfortable and happy with her position, because it is not seen as low as she could be potentially. And as she indoctrinates her own cabin to ignore and even deny the drums being heard from the other parts of the plane, she fails to get her cabin to pledge not to rebel. She lies about the morality of the plane, almost as if to save the company's face as to what they are willing and capable of doing if the passengers do not comply. Listen as Miss Pat justifies the years of enslavement and torture their destination will offer the passengers once they arrive.
Why, the songs you'll sing in the cotton field under the burning heat and the stinging lash will metamorphose and give birth to the likes of James Brown and the Fabulous Flames. And you are gonna come up with some of the best dances, the very best dances, the Watusi, the Funky Chicken, and just think of what you are going to mean to William Faulkner. All right, so you're going to have to suffer a few 100 years. But from your pain will come a culture so complex. And with this little item here, you are going to become millionaires. Don't panic. If we're going to make it through this storm, you must abandon your God and worship a new one.
Celebrity, fame, and atonement for their torture
culture, and identity.
The African drums heard is a symbol for African Americans to hold onto their identity and culture to survive. The plane ascends and enters a time warp. This mid-flight passage is where we are passing through American history, where the American Black community's will to survive are tested. All while hearing the drums continue to play, the plane lands into the present. Miss Pat reminds the passenger that they will be stripped of their identity and they will not be going back in time. This is an attempt to still indoctrinate the passengers to give themselves completely over to their new reality and culture. Her final warning being,
Please check the overhead before exiting, as any baggage you don't claim, we trash. It's been fun. And we hope the next time you consider travel, it's with celebrity. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Bye-bye. Button up that overcoat, it's gonna be kind of chilly. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Have a nice day.
Thank you for watching this video. If you like this content, please like and subscribe and consider being a Patreon on my Patreon page. Link is in the description below. Thank you. It's pretty fucking dark.